Welcome everybody as we begin our Wednesday study session that shall not be named. We have it on YouTube for those just watching. We have it on Zoom for those who want to participate. We had a nice class in person last week at the library, which is an amazing library. I was going to get all these books I was purchasing and books on tape and albums, but they only took cash. By the time I had to cash, I had to get back, so I wasn't able to, but I'll go back there again. And we were thinking about having a Hanukkah party next week in person. I don't think that's going to work out, so we'll just have a regular study session, and hopefully next year we'll start the in-person things again. But I'm going to have a Hanukkah party on my own next Wednesday, just by myself, so it's okay. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about Hanukkah, because we always take one session a year to talk about Hanukkah. And so what we're going to do is talk about, as we've done before, just a reminder on the evolution of Hanukkah, which is a really incredible story. Talked about in services, but we're going to more detail. Hanukkah occurs during the biblical age. Now, the books of the Maccabees didn't make it in the Bible, but the Bible, we don't believe, was codified to the year 90 CE, and Hanukkah happens 162 BCE. So it's been around for 250 years by the time the Bible is set. Those books were not chosen, but they're still written during the biblical age. That's why they're considered part of the Apocrypha, which means that unlike all the other holidays from the Bible, from the more recent ones like Purim to the ancient ones like Rosh Hashanah, we have extra evidence about this holiday. So there's evidence as to what was going on with Hanukkah through the ages, and we have none of this for any of the earlier holidays. So we can see a very specific, or find evidence of a very specific evolution of this holiday just from some texts, and also from what's gone on the last 100 and 150 years for the holiday, which is what people will be probably looking at in 1,000 years. How did Hanukkah evolve originally? How did it evolve in the 19th and 20th centuries and 21st centuries, when it became a very different holiday than it ever was before? So what I'm going to show you here are some texts about the holiday, which I think we've looked at before, but I always love to look at it because it's so interesting. And here is, and I just put the spelling of Hanukkah up there because there's no exact way to spell Hanukkah. It's a Hebrew word. And so somehow that didn't get centered when I did the PDF. So it's a Hebrew word, so you spell it however you want. So what we're going to look at is, first of all, one of the texts from the second book of Maccabees. Now, there's two books of Maccabees that detail the revolution. This is one of the pieces from it. It says, Maccabeus, who obviously is the Maccabees, or Judah Maccabee, with his men led by the Lord, recovered the temple and city of Jerusalem. He demolished the altars erected by the heathens in this public square and their sacred precincts as well. When they had purified the sanctuary, they constructed another altar. Then, striking fire from flints, they offered a sacrifice for the first time in 2 whole years, and restored the incense, the lights, and the breads of presence. This done, they prostrated themselves and prayed the Lord not to let them fall anymore into such disasters. Should they ever happen, to discipline them with clemency and not hand them over to blasphemous and barbarous Gentiles. Here's the important part. The sanctuary was purified on the 25th of Kislev, the same day of the same month as that on which the foreigners had profaned it. The joyful celebration lasted for 8 days. It was like the Feast of Tabernacles. What does that mean? What is the Feast of Tabernacles? The Feast of Tabernacles is Sukkot. So, in other words, we have to understand the meaning of Sukkot. In ancient times, Sukkot was the most important holiday because it's the holiday you pray for rain. In Israel, you have 2 seasons, the rainy season and the dry season. The rainy season starts in September, the dry season in April. So Sukkot, you pray for rain. Now, when was the temple rededicated according to the American calendar or the international calendar? According to the international calendar, it was rededicated in December. What holiday did they miss in September then? They had missed Sukkot. So when they rededicate the temple in December, they don't bother with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. What do? They celebrate Sukkot, whereas a teacher used to tell me Sukkot in December. So what they have now? Sukkot in December. Now, while we think maybe it's a one-time thing, even though they say it should be something for all time, it possibly could be we missed Sukkot the last 2 years. We're just going to do Sukkot in December this year, and then next year we'll go back to a regular Sukkot in September. However, we have extra evidence of what else is going on. Years later, we have an answer to the letter from Jews in Egypt. What is the question the Jews of Egypt have of the Jews in Israel? Here it is. To the Jewish kinsmen in Egypt, the Jews who are in Jerusalem and those in the country of Judea, send brotherly greeting. May God give you peace and prosperity and remember his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his faithful servants. May he give to you a will to worship, to fulfill his purposes eagerly with heart and soul. May he give you a mind to open up his law and precepts. May he make peace and answer your prayers and be reconciled to you and not forsake you in an evil hour. Here and now we're praying to you. In the reign of Demetrius in the year 169, we, the Jews, wrote to you during the persecution and the crisis that came upon us in those years since the time when Jason and his partisans revolted from the Holy Land and the kingdom. They set the porch of the temple on fire and shed innocent blood. Then we prayed to the Lord and were answered. We offered a sacrifice and fine flour. We lit lamps and set out the bread of presents. And now you are to observe the celebration of a Feast of Tabernacles in the month of Kislev. What are we saying here? It is confirmed that Jews everywhere, not just in Jerusalem, are supposed to be celebrating Sukkot in September and then another Sukkot in December, which probably was very different because obviously the Sukkot in September is all about praying for rain. By December, the rain should have already been started. If it hasn't, things are bad. So now what we know is we had a one-time, Michael.
Okay, question. I might have missed a lower line, but the second text was written in the year 188. Is that BCE or CE?
That is BC, but that's not according to, remember, this is before what we have is the Greco-Roman calendar. Back then, they based their calendars usually on a king. This is the 50th year of the reign of blank.
Yeah.
So those dates have no meaning to us in terms of the international calendar we use or the Jewish calendar.
Well, because the previous text was 124, I believe.
Yeah, that was actually the date. So when you go up to here, 124 BC is the actual date according to what we know. Not, you know, so the second text, I don't have the exact dates. If I should look it up.
Okay.
So remember, just ignore
because
these years because these years are a different calendar. It's basically, it's a few years later.
I confuse easily.
That's a very confusing thing because you got two dates that are on different calendars that have no connection to each other whatsoever.
Yeah.
The 124 BCE obviously is anachronistically putting the date in there because they did not know it was BCE in BCE. They didn't know it was before the Common Era, just like World War I was not called World War I until they had a World War II. So that's what's going on here. So now we know we have two Sukkot holidays, one in September, which we know about, one in December. We're not always clear on how they celebrated because the next time we hear about this holiday really comes from Josephus, the great historian. He was a Jewish military leader. He switched sides to the Romans when he realized we were going to lose, and he became a great historian. Now, this text is from 75 CE. They don't realize it's CE yet either. Now, Judas celebrated the festival, the restoration of the sacrifices of the temple for 8 days, and men in no sort of pleasure then. But he feasted them upon very rich and splendid sacrifices, and he honored God and delighted them by hymns and psalms. Nay, they were so very glad at the revival of their customs when, after a long time of intermission, they unexpectedly had regained the freedom of worship, that they made it law for their posterity that they should keep a festival on account of the restoration of their temple worship for 8 days. Very normal. And from that time to this time, we celebrate this festival, and it is called Lights. I suppose the reason was because this liberty beyond our hopes appeared to us, and that thence was the name given to the festival. Judas also rebuilt the walls around the city and reared towers of great height against the incursion of enemies and set guards therein. He also fortified the city, Bethshura, that it might serve as a citadel against any distress that might come from our enemies. He tells us this holiday has always been called Lights. Except, what do we know? It has not always been called Lights, because we just saw it was called Sukkot. We don't know when it changed to Lights, but we know by the year 75 CE, people were celebrating a holiday called Lights. Were they celebrating its connection to Sukkot? Not at all. He doesn't mention Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, at all. They're celebrating the victory of the Maccabees. That's what the holiday is. He says, since that day, we always celebrate the celebration of the victory of the Maccabees, and we call the holiday Lights. That is Michael.
Oh, go ahead, finish your sentence.
No, please. I'd rather have questions.
Okay, here's another question. Things are not meshing for me. The first sentence there, they celebrated the festival and sacrifices of the temple for 8 days.
Right.
If the temple had been destroyed, I thought we stopped sacrificing. And
No. This is before. Remember, Josephus, he's writing this after the destruction of the temple, is talking about hundreds of years earlier when the temple still existed.
Okay. But then the other thing that's interesting is, but okay, the pleasure's there, but he feasted. Okay, that's who is he? Judas. And so was he the high priest?
Judah was the Maccabee, was the head leader of the force, and they were a priestly clan as well. They believed themselves later to be a priestly clan. Well, they were priestly, but they were not. That's an issue we're going to talk about in just a second, actually.
Okay, because the priest did, got the sacrifices.
Exactly. And,
okay.
That's a great question, because it's really pertinent to what the next question. You have to understand the Maccabees are from a Kohanim possibly family, but not the Kohanim, but they're not the high priest family. There's different Kohens. They're not all Kohens are directly connected to the high priest. That's a very particular one. So after the Maccabees take back the temple and become stewards of the land of Israel, they do something that not even David did. They make themselves the kings and the priests at the same time. So in history, the king is David, the priest comes from the line of Aaron. They're not related at all. But here they are, because remember, Aaron's from the line of Levi. And so the idea of the kingship and the priesthood belonging to the same people is abhorrent to Judaism, which professes a division of church and state. That's going to be really important to understand. Plus, the Maccabees became very corrupt.
Yeah.
Why is that important to understand? Because it's essential to understand that fact that the rabbis were part of the Pharisees who did not like the priests, especially the corrupt ones. Why is that so important? Because we read this next one in the Talmud, which is written by the rabbis. And now this is hundreds of years later. It's from Tractate Shabbat. What is the reason of Hanukkah? This is the first time we see the word Hanukkah. The first time we see the word Hanukkah is approximately 500 or 600 years after the story of Hanukkah. Let me repeat that. We don't hear the word Hanukkah at all until 500 plus years after the Maccabees. What is the reason of Hanukkah? For our rabbis taught on the 25th of Kislev commence the days of Hanukkah, which are 8 on which a lamentation for the dead and fasting are forbidden. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils therein. And when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed against and defeated them, they made search and found only one cruse of oil, which lay with the seal of the high priest, but which contained sufficient for one day's lighting only. Yet a miracle was wrought therein, and they lit the lamp therewith for 8 days. The following year, these days were appointed a festival with the recital of Hallel and Thanksgiving. This is nothing like what we saw from Josephus, we saw in the Egyptian letter, or we read in the Maccabees. They're saying that the next year they celebrated Hanukkah, and that the celebration revolved around this miracle of the oil. Did we read about the miracle of the oil from Josephus or from the book of Maccabees or from the letters to Egypt? The answer is no. This is the first time we hear about it. The first time we hear about the miracle of the oil is 500 or 600 years after the fact, which is really incredible to see once you have evidence otherwise. Some really other interesting points. They celebrate 8 days, and it says here, a lamentation for the dead, and fasting is forbidden. Hanukkah is 8 days. Why were they celebrating 8 days of this holiday originally? Because Sukkot is 8 days. So now all of a sudden, guess what other holiday is 8 days? Hanukkah. Coincidence? Probably not. Sukkot morphed into, the second Sukkot morphed into Hanukkah. What is further evidence? At the very bottom, it says, we sing Hallel on Hanukkah. What is Hallel? Hallel are a special group of prayers that are only recited for major holidays. Is Hanukkah a major holiday? No. Is Hanukkah in the Torah? No. It has to be a holiday in the Torah to get Hallel. Yet we say Hallel, or at least pieces of it, for Hanukkah. Why then do we say Hallel for a very minor holiday? Because guess what? Originally it was Sukkot, which is a major holiday. This is all, by the way, not definitive proof, but it's evidence. We know the Maccabees were not venerated by, but hated by the rabbis. So what does the holiday celebrate? Does it celebrate the victory of the Maccabees? No, it celebrates the power of God and how there's a miracle of this oil. So what we see is over approximately 550 years plus years is an evolution of the holiday of Hanukkah. It started off as we're going to celebrate Sukkot because we missed it. Then it becomes we're celebrating a second Sukkot every year in Israel and abroad. Then it becomes a holiday called Lights, which celebrates the victory of the Maccabees, not Sukkot. Then it becomes a holiday called Hanukkah, which celebrates the miracle of the oil. Ron.
You know, I know that Hanukkah is a minor holiday, but if God made the oil last for 8 days, that's a miracle.
It is.
Why is it considered a minor holiday?
Well, that's an important question. If you believe in the miracle, you might say it's a major holiday. It can only be a major holiday if it's in the Torah.
Oh,
That doesn't mean it's not important. Holocaust Remembrance Day is very important to us, as we know. Israel Independence Day, very important to a lot of people. These are not holidays in the Torah either, but so they can't be. The thing about a major holiday means you're not supposed to work, and that's the big one. And there's certain other, so it doesn't mean it's not important. It just means it's not a major holiday. Michael.
Okay, this is maybe a little off the wall, but
Great. I love off the wall. That's my
yeah.
favorite.
But the candles, 8 days, and supposed to know the day. Orthodox and conservative Jews, extend the holiday for a day because they weren't sure when the holiday would begin. So you don't want to not.
They don't do that
celebrate
for
it properly.
They don't do that for Hanukkah.
That's the question.
Yeah, no,
That's
not
the
for
question.
Hanukkah.
Why?
Well, Hanukkah, first of all, is a minor holiday, so it's not essential because there's not a prohibition on work. So unlike major holidays, you have to get in the entire one. Hanukkah is a minor holiday. It's, so it's not as essential. So they don't have this idea of adding an extra day for it because of it.
Isn't it still a mitzvah to light the candles on the proper day?
It is, but you can light, but you're not required, except for maybe on the Sabbath, to light it at any specific time.
Right.
You can light it.
That's
It's
true.
not like Shabbat where it has to be lit at a very precise moment. Plus, it's lit by all people. I mean, everybody. We'll talk about that in a second. So it takes time to get everybody lighting it. So even kids can light their own. So, and we'll talk about that in a second. That's an excellent question. We do not add it, just like Purim, which is in the Bible, but not a major holiday. You don't add extra time for that one either. There's not two. There's not 2 days of Purim for that reason. There's a fast of Esther, which you can add, and there's another day you can add. So this is the evolution of Hanukkah. And we're going to see a further evolution later. But let's look at one of the more famous texts about the holiday. And that is from also the Talmud, funny enough, from Shabbat, which is ironic because obviously, as you look over here, this is Tractate Shabbat on text number 4 about Hanukkah, and text number 7 is also from the same tractate, the same place. So this is the debate over how to light the menorah that became so famous. As is always or often the case, it's between the schools of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Almost always when the schools of Hillel, which is the more lenient of the schools, and the school of Shammai, the more strict, almost always Hillel wins the argument. I think there's 3 times in history where Hillel doesn't outright win it. 3 times in history where Shammai wins it completely. This is one of those rare occasions where neither Shammai or Hillel wins. Our rabbis taught the precepts of Hanukkah require one light for each man and his household. Later, they saying that women as well. Those who seek to beautify the mitzvot kindle a single light for each household member. Concerning those who are particularly eager to beautify the mitzvot, Beit Shammai says on the first day he lights 8 and then decreases in number each day. So from Shammai's point of view, on the first day of Hanukkah, you light 8 candles. The second day, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and the last day you light 1. We know he doesn't win this one. And Beit Hillel says on the first day he kindles 1 light and then he increases day by day, which is what we do. We light 1 candle on the first day, 2 on the second. Says Ula, 2 Amorim of Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yossi ben Avin and Rabbi Yossi ben Zavida debate. One says that Beit Shammai considers the days remaining, while Beit Hillel considers the days elapsed. So in other words, Shammai thinks the importance of the holiday declines as you go along, whereas Hillel believes it ascends. The other says that Beit Shammai lights in a way that corresponds to the sacrificial bulls of Sukkot, while Beit Hillel argues the principle that one always works to increase holiness and not to decrease. So it seems like from this that Hillel wins again. Because when we all light the Hanukkah candle, we light the first night, we light one. However, there was a later compromise. So we put the candles in, the first night one, the second night two, the second night three, but we light the newest candle first. So that was the compromise that was later come to. So first night I light one, the second night I put 2 candles, I light the new candle first, and then the one from day one. So on the 8th day, I would light the last candle I light the candles from left to right, but I put the candles in right to left. And so that's the compromise we have to this day. Now, we all know about the other traditions, that the eating of latkes, which is a tradition that goes way back. As I said in sermons previously, we know the Maccabees did not eat potato latkes because potatoes came over from America to Europe with Christopher Columbus. So there was no potato latkes until at the very earliest, at the late 15th century, really actually the 16th century. But there were latkes. They were just filled with things like fruit and stuff like that, or foods, kind of like a meat pie, which sounds so strange to me. But before pies became a sugary, savory dessert, before they became a sugary dessert, they were a savory dessert. Same thing with sufganiyot, jelly donuts. Sugar used to be very expensive and rare until Europe started bringing in sugar from the Caribbean. The sufganiyot, the donuts, were not sugar donuts. They were pastries filled with things like cheeses and meats, or depending what your tradition was, or fruits. And then it became donuts like we know them today. So there's lots of evolution we see for Hanukkah in a variety of ways. However, we are also unique in our perspective, not only because we have these historical references and we have history and education, but because we have lived the evolution of Hanukkah, which is really amazing. I have lived the evolution of a holiday in a very distinct way, which is very rare. You know, you generally celebrate holiday, and it's very similar to what your ancestors did for a long time, and it evolves certainly, but it doesn't evolve usually very quickly. Even from when I was a kid in the 70s, Hanukkah has evolved. How has it evolved? It is bigger now, a lot bigger. There are Hanukkah specials, there's Hanukkah music, there's Hanukkah parties. Non-Jews know about Hanukkah. When I was growing up, you know, it was a little well known in the Christian world. There'd be like a Hanukkah song at the Christmas pageant, and I'd get my presents, but it was still pretty small, and there'd be a little party. Now it's huge. You go to Target or Walmart in the middle of cities that don't have any Jews, and they still have Hanukkah displays. You go on YouTube, and I can find tons of awesome Hanukkah music, from the Maccabees to 613 to Peter, Paul, and Mary. So there's plenty of Hanukkah music. There's Hanukkah parties galore. And more importantly, Jews and Christians celebrate the holidays together. So Christians, know about Hanukkah. And they may not know exactly what it is, but they know we celebrate it, and they're excited for us. They're thrilled to learn about that. I'm going to go teach to 350 kids tomorrow at Hancock about Hanukkah, as I do every year. They're excited to learn about a different, so it's as in terms of which holidays have connected us to non-Jews more than any other holiday, it's Hanukkah. Because most non-Jews have not heard about any of the other holidays, maybe Passover. Hanukkah has taken over from Purim as the super fun holiday for most Jews. Hanukkah is now, for most Jews in America, the #1 let's party holiday for Jews. It used to be Purim, and Purim's still a party holiday. It's just more do Hanukkah than Purim. It's not the most celebrated holiday of all the Jewish holidays, that's Passover. But Hanukkah, especially if you have kids, it is Party City. I know Hanukkah is a lot bigger now that I have kids. Now, what's interesting though is Hanukkah did not evolve in a vacuum. And if we're going to talk about the evolution, I didn't mean to keep that long. The evolution of Hanukkah, we have to do something else first. Because quite frankly, the evolution of Hanukkah is not due just to Hanukkah, it's due to Christmas. I mean, that's really one of the reasons Hanukkah has evolved, is because of the evolution of Christmas. We think, well, it's so awesome that we now celebrate Hanukkah along Christmas as Christians have always done, except for that's not true. Because Christians have not always celebrated Hanukkah in the way that they celebrate it today. And we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of Christmas, because Christmas obviously is the most important and most celebrated holiday for Christians in our country. Now, for those of you who don't realize, in most of the world, Christmas is not the #1 Christian holiday that's celebrated. It's always been Easter. Traditionally, Easter is the most important holiday for obvious reasons. In most countries, that is the #1 holiday still. So why do we start Christmas? Because quite frankly, Christmas did not come around till hundreds and hundreds of years after the death of Jesus. So just like Hanukkah and the story of the oil, the story of the birth of Jesus on this date and making it a celebration doesn't come for hundreds of years until after he's died. We all know one of the reasons the early church chose December 25th. It was because there's already a lot of holidays at this time of year. It's the winter solstice. People are celebrating the winter not being as cold. And that's probably why, because there was a holiday called Saturnalia, or how do you pronounce Saturnalia? And that came at that time, and the Romans wanted the pagans to kind of move over to another holiday. So Jesus was probably born in the spring. There have been centuries where Hanukkah or Christmas wasn't even celebrated at all. It was forbidden to be celebrated by Oliver Cromwell and by others. So the Puritans outlawed it because they didn't think it was, original holiday. It doesn't become a federal holiday in America till 1870. There are traditions, though, in other places that it becomes a big drinking festival, kind of like Purim. But it's not what it is today. It becomes the holiday it is today because of a couple things that happened in the 19th century. First of all, there is a lot of issues between the upper class and lower classes in America, especially places like New York. And Washington Irving wrote the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, a series of stories about how Christmas was celebrated in an English manor house where they allowed the poor to come and celebrate with them. And they gave food to the poor because in ancient times, in some places, Christmas was a place where the poor would bang on the rich homes. And if the rich didn't give them a nice meal, they would play tricks on them, kind of like Halloween. So this comes out and people start thinking, well, maybe this is a good thing to do. Create a holiday which brings the upper and lower classes together. And then an even bigger book, of course, is written just a few years later, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, which we all know and we've probably read or seen. And this, and plus what happened previously, helped to create this idea of Christmas as a time of helping the poor. They also brought back a character who was born in Turkey hundreds of thousand years 1700 years earlier called Santa Claus, who is, of course, based on St. Nicholas. But he does not become part of Christmas in America till the late 18th century. So you don't see Santa Claus in America until really the 19th century in bulk. And he originally was not the happy-go-lucky guy we see. A minister named Clement Clark Moore wrote an account of a visit from St. Nicholas, which is called now 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. And that shows that Santa Claus is a happy guy who's bringing presents to kids. So all of this is being evolved. All of this evolution is going really in the 19th century. And so all of a sudden, Christmas starts to become bigger and bigger. Coke, all of a sudden, in the early 20th century, wants to have an ad campaign. And they take this vision from Clement Clark Moore and use that Santa Claus, the jolly Santa Claus, for their Coke ads. And Christmas becomes even bigger. Then all of a sudden, what happens? You've got Rudolph coming in 1939. You got Rockefeller Center in 1931. You've got presents starting to be given. You've got advertisements. You've got parties. So a lot of this happened in the 19th century, and a lot of it happened in the 20th century. So some people living today lived at a time before Santa Claus was known as a jolly person, because although he was depicted in this poem as a jolly person, it's really Coca-Cola in the 1930s that brings Santa Claus to what he is today. Then you have all of this great music being written about Christmas by who? By Jewish composers, because you can make more money writing Christmas songs than, of course, Hanukkah songs. And all of a sudden, circa 2022, Christmas is by far the biggest holiday in terms of celebrations, in terms of marketing, in terms of money spent. And Hanukkah tagged along. And that is why Hanukkah evolved, is because of Christmas. So what you see is some sort of binary evolution here, where if we did not have the evolution of Christmas, Hanukkah would be nothing more than lighting candles and putting them on the windowsill, and that's it. You might spin the dreidel, have a latke, but it was nothing. It was not a big holiday. Now, of course, I got to get presents for every night for my kids. We're going to go visit my mother-in-law on Christmas Day, and she'll have more presents for my kids. Basically, my kids doesn't really matter because I'm a rabbi in this community and I have mother-in-law and friends. And so every single day of the year is Christmas and Hanukkah for my kids, basically. Their rooms are basically toy stores. So that's where we are today, that Hanukkah is now totally different than it ever has been before. And it's really quite interesting to see. Now, when we look at the text, we know the rules for lighting the candles. You put them on right to left, you light them left to right. But there are, other traditions that arise in each place. And so, as Rabbi Irving Berlin wrote, not as tightly knit in paradigm, theme, and practice as the other holidays, Hanukkah lends itself to being a type of holy day Rorschach test. Every community and generation has interpreted Hanukkah in its own image, speaking to its own needs. And it's really an interesting dynamic because whereas my minister and priest friends always debate Christmas because it's become so commercialized, which bothers them, it doesn't bother me that Hanukkah has become so commercialized because it's not a major holiday. This is not a holiday like Yom Kippur, which is dedicated to fasting and memorial. It's not, Tisha B'Av. It is a minor holiday which we just party and have fun. And that is really nothing. There's nothing in Judaism that says you can't do that. So you can celebrate it with major parties or just light the menorah. It doesn't matter because you're not breaking any rules either way. So that's how Hanukkah has evolved through the years. And it means something different to everybody. To the rabbis, it meant the miracle of God. To the Maccabees, it meant being in control of the temple. With Sukkot, to Josephus, it meant celebrating the Maccabees. For a very long time, Hanukkah was not really celebrated very much. The rabbis tried to get rid of it, probably. That's why they probably had the story of the oil, because they couldn't get rid of Hanukkah. So they created the story of the oil. Some believe the story of the oil is true, others don't. But we know that Hanukkah is a much bigger, much more celebrated today than ever before. Any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I think it's more celebrated because of commercialization.
Amen. It is. And it's for us as Jews, it's not as bad because, again, the commercialization does not detract from the meaning of Hanukkah, because the meaning of Hanukkah is, celebration. So it definitely makes it more difficult for Christians who are dealing with that dilemma, but we don't have it. But what it does do is it connects us. We go and babysit at First Presbyterian. For years, hospitals did something called trading places, where Jews would come in and take the places of everybody. They don't do it anymore. It's not allowed because obviously there's a lot of issues legally from doing that. So Jews go to Christmas parties, Christians come to Hanukkah parties. It's really a wonderful holiday. Michael.
How has the celebration of Hanukkah evolved in Israel?
It's an interesting dynamic, because what you're seeing, which is very unique to Israel, because Israel usually sets the precedent for how things are done in the rest of the world. Jewishly, it's been kind of the opposite now. As America has become more centered on Hanukkah, it's become a lot bigger in Israel. You will see Israeli kids getting presents for Hanukkah now. You'll see Israelis having Hanukkah parties. And that's mostly because of what's happening in America. And the Jews of America, of course, are celebrating Hanukkah because of the Christians. So just like Jews have affected other religions in so many ways, Hanukkah in Israel is how it is in many respects because of the Christians in America. So it all works together, Ron.
Yeah, in Israel, how does the Orthodox feel about Hanukkah?
The Orthodox have kind of kept Hanukkah at bay a little bit. They still light the menorah, but it's not a huge holiday there at all. It's still a minor holiday. They celebrate it very similarly, the ultra-Orthodox especially. So they'll light the candles, definitely. They revere it as a holiday, but it's a minor holiday, and they just light the candles, and they'll eat jelly donuts or latkes depending on your what your background is. It's not a major holiday in that world. And I think they've intentionally kept it at bay because they know it's so big in the liberal Jewish world. But in Israel, it's not like America. It's not as commercialized as America by any stretch of the imagination. But then again, no country in history has ever been as commercialized as America in anything. So that's not saying much. But it's definitely much more celebrated and much more venerated than other holidays. In Israel, when you think of you think of a very natural connection to Hanukkah, that it's a very easy way to connect, and that it's been a little bigger there than in other places, but not in a celebratory way like us. Why would Israelis look at Hanukkah as a more important holiday than other places? Because it's about a group of Jews who kick out the people. It's a warrior tale. And so it's a natural for Israel to be very Hanukkah-centric. So Israel's definitely thought more highly of Hanukkah than any Jewish country in history. But the way they're celebrating it now really comes from the way America celebrates it in many respects. You would never have seen a present being given in Israel until we started giving presents here. But it's looked at more like a socialist holiday in Israel as opposed to a religious one in many respects, because they look at it not as much from the perspective, they do like the oil is still important, but they look at it from this group of Jews were really great warriors. They kicked out a pretty powerful nation out of their country and kept them out. It helped that once they kicked them out, the other country ended up going to war with Rome, and they had bigger issues to deal with. But they were able to kick them out, and they never came back. And now that's a story that Israelis really like.
You know, I would imagine that Hanukkah would play an important part for the Jews in the Ukraine.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Because what those families are going through, especially the children, it would be very good for them to have something which shows them hope.
And that's an excellent analysis. And it's really, if you think about it, a lot of our holidays are about us losing wars or being saved by God. You know, we lost 3 wars against Rome. The temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. We were taken over by the Assyrians, by the Greeks, by the Persians. And Hanukkah is the opposite. It's about us winning. Most of Judaism is a lesson in the mistakes we make, where Hanukkah is a lesson in how we actually won the war. Although the Maccabees become corrupt later, but in actual the war, they won that war. So I think very much so. And so that's a little bit about Hanukkah. So next week, we're going to still come together. We'll do it online unless somebody at the last second wants to host a Hanukkah party. But no pressure. It's not like, but if you want to send me jelly donuts, that'd be great. I'm just putting it out there. So we don't have a discussion for next week's setup because we're thinking it was going to be a Hanukkah party. Does anybody have any ideas of anything they might want to study next week? We were supposed to do Jews for Jesus on January 4th. We can certainly move that up to next week.
So we can do that.
And talk about the cult Jews for Jesus.
Where are we going to be? Oh, that's right. We have a next week on the 14th. We have a funeral.
Okay, so we can talk about something else. Who passed away, by the way?
A friend of ours. His name is James Bacon.
I'm sorry to hear that.
We've known him for many, many years.
Our condolences to you.
Yeah.
All right, well, all our best. And next week, do you want us to do something else next week, Ron? Are you interested in the topic Jews for Jesus? Or I can easily pause on that one and do it at a different time.
We're not going to be at the course next week.
I know, I'm saying I could pick a different topic if you want to hear that one. Or you can watch it online later, whatever you want.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so we'll talk about a little bit of Jews for Jesus, which is interesting because I was a rabbi in Dallas for 4 years, only a couple blocks from the center church for Jews for Jesus, because it's one of the biggest centers for it because it's one of the big cities, and so I encountered them several times. So, all right, thanks guys. So everybody online who's watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoy this. You're always welcome to join us on Zoom, and we'll be here next week, and then we're going to take the last 2 Wednesdays in December off, and then we'll start again in January. So next week, no Hanukkah party, and we're going to study Jews for Jesus.
Okay.
If you get a chance, Rabbi, and believe me, don't go out of your way. If you could send the slides, those are very interesting.
The slides, what slides are we talking about?
The text.
Oh, the text. I'll send it out to everybody right now. Or do you want me to just send it to you, or should I send it out to everybody? To everybody? Do you want me to send it to you or to everybody? I'm sorry, I couldn't. I'll just send them to you.
Well, I'd like them. I mean, I don't know about other people. I bet you Larry. Yeah, I don't know.
I'll send them to Larry, you, and because obviously if people are on here, they may not know the context. All right, I'll send those to you right now.
Okay, thank you so much.
Do you have my new email?
I do. I just put the one you just sent out. Let me double check, but I just replaced your old one with that one. And I don't want to say it now because there are people watching on YouTube, but I have the new one, I believe.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you on Saturday.
I'll see you Saturday, everybody. Stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah to
Happy
you
Hanukkah.
and the whole family.